Hey super scientists, we're looking at evolution 4 and we're going to be talking about geological evolution. We're going to talk about some examples of geological evolution, but one that we have already talked about a little bit is continental drift as it relates to the Glossopteris fossils that have been found in various continents, but also were specifically found in Antarctica. So the Glossopteris, remember, is a tropical fern, it's a tropical plant, and tropical plants don't grow in areas that have a climate like Antarctica does today, the cold and icy continent. So that indicates to us that Antarctica previously had a warmer, more tropical environment when it was located closer to the equator. Alfred Wegener is one scientist who discovered continental drift. So he came up with the idea of Pangaea, this supercontinent that had all the continents connected together. And Wegener, one of his pieces of evidence is that he saw, by looking at the shape of the continents, that they had a puzzle-like fit. Specifically, South America and Africa, they very much look like they would have matched up together as puzzle pieces. So this continent of Pangaea was all the continents connected together, and you can see that they're kind of centered around the equator. Weathering, erosion, and deposition are some processes that shape Earth's surface. Weathering breaks rocks down, erosion moves rocks around, and deposition deposits or puts the rocks down. So if you look at the shape of these mountains, the Adirondack Mountains, you can see that they used to be up at this point, and they were much higher, and they had a very much sharper point to them, but now they are shorter and they're kind of rounded. So the rounded look to the tops of these mountains indicates that they have been worn down over time. Continental drift is another example of how Earth's surface changes. So continental drift is just the continents drifting. The continents move on the tectonic plates, and they move around from location to location. It's a very small amount, about like 2 centimeters or so per year. So each year they don't move a lot, but over time we end up seeing some evidence for that, especially in areas that are very much tectonically active, like in California. You can actually see some areas where the sidewalk used to be lined up, but now there's cracks in it and it may be misaligned, and that is due to the movement of these tectonic plates. So the Earth has continually gone through these cycles of the continents moving around. Pangaea is not the only supercontinent that ever existed. There have been multiple iterations of this. You can look up Rodinia and Gondwanaland and Laurasia. There's lots of different variations, but Pangaea is kind of the one that is more familiar to us. And that was about 225 million years ago. And then it started going through this process of breaking up during the Mesozoic era. So what are some pieces of evidence for continental drift? Well, Alfred Wegener noticed the puzzle-like fit of the continents. There also have been glacial deposits found in Africa, South America, India, Australia. So those are areas that have warmer climates today. And glacial deposits would be from glaciers, large chunks of ice that would have built up and would be very thick on land masses. So it would have taken a very long time for those glaciers to form, and so that indicates that it had to have been at a colder location. And that's like the image that we see here. So based on the continents moving around, they have at different points in time, there have been glacial areas, and then as they move closer to the equator, then those glaciers will melt, and then as they move further around to the poles, then they get colder and glaciers form again. So the Earth has gone through several of these cycles. Tropical plant fossils, the Glossopteris, like we looked at, have been found in Antarctica. So that indicates, again, a piece of evidence that Antarctica used to have a much warmer kind of environment. Paleomagnetic data and seafloor spreading. So paleomagnetic data is just referring to how the iron-based metallic rocks, as they form, those particular elements will line up with the poles. And so what we end up seeing at the mid-ocean ridge, which is where seafloor spreading occurs, is that as the as magma is rising to the surface and that lava cools off and forms new ocean floor, the ions and materials in the element will line up directionally with the magnetic North Pole. And throughout Earth's history, the magnetic North Pole has flip-flopped from the North Pole to the South Pole, North Pole to South Pole, and we see that those elements have lined up, either pointing to the magnetic north or the south, just depending on this flip-flop of the magnetic poles. Plate tectonics. So plate tectonics just says that Earth's crust is broken into these large sections, and these large sections are called tectonic plates. And each of these tectonic plates is going to cover varying amounts of land, but it will allow for the continents to move. Most of the plates do have at least a section of continent on them. So as you can see, the North American plate has North America on it. The Australian plate has Australia. So there's varying amounts of land or continent that is on each of these plates. And it's a misunderstanding that some people have, but a lot of people think that the continents just kind of float around on top of the ocean. But the continents are actually land. It's actually connected down to the bottom of the ocean. So it's essentially granite and bedrock that has built up over time. So the continents aren't just floating around like floats in a swimming pool. But those tectonic plates do move over time. They don't move a whole lot each year. They just move a little bit at a time. But that's what allows the mechanism that allows for the continents to move. There's different types of movements that will happen at plate boundaries. We've talked a little bit about these in the past. Convergent, divergent, and transform plate boundaries. So your stem means together. So convergent plates will move together, and that can form mountains. It can form subduction of oceanic plates. So it just depends on what type of material it is, if it's an oceanic plate or if it is a continental plate. Divergent plates will pull apart, and when divergent plates pull apart, like at the seafloor spreading area at the mid-ocean ridge, you're going to have magma that rises to the surface and it can form new crust. And transform plate boundaries will slide past one another, like the San Andreas Fault in California. So how can geological evolution affect living organisms? If you have continents that are separating or land areas that are breaking apart, then those organisms, the plants and animals that are on those different areas, are going to get separated from other organisms within their species. And this can cause speciation to occur. So this geographic isolation, this separating of different organisms in a species, will cause those organisms to develop different characteristics based on their new environments. So they may have to adapt, much like the finches in the Galapagos did.